this. I actually wanted to play this song the whole through as you guys came in because The Power by Vanessa Amorosi. Vanessa is an Australian singer. She opened the Sydney Olympics in 2000 with absolutely everybody. I think you know that. But more than anything, she talks a lot about the power from within. And today I'd like to share the fact that I'm an Australian girl, so I want to put on an Australian singer. But more than anything, I wanted to be here to honor the 22 women that has grown so much in the last 8 weeks. And nothing is an accident. I was asked to be one of the mentors, and it's such a privilege because I think I've grown more in these 8 weeks than maybe all of them put together. And seeing them up there this morning brought much tears of joy. And so today, I want to celebrate them as women who have stood on the shoulders of giants. Because a lot has been spoken about women being disadvantaged over the centuries, but in every century, in every age, there has been outliers. And today I want to share some of my own story, a little bit about how I think we all start as bright-eyed, bushy-tailed young ladies. That's what I'm going to start with, a lesson in history. This picture is of me sitting as a 6-year-old next to my great-grandmother. I called her Sao Tai because there's a Fei Tai as well. A great-grandmother who was a little bit plumper, we call her Fei Tai, but Sao Tai was a very strict great-grandmother. Nobody's ever seen her smile. And actually she's just breaking into a smile. And Sao Tai came from a background where she immigrated to Malaya with a young daughter in tow. She was not educated. So she had very few options. She could have been a seamstress, but she said she doesn't sew. She could have been a teacher, but she can't teach because she wasn't educated. She could have been a prostitute, but she didn't believe in that. So she actually supplied the brothels with opium, and she became the big mama. Tough lady in a hostile world when you think of the turn of the century. But I never knew that, right? I only know this stern woman that I sat next to every time I went to visit Ipoh, which is where she lives. But when I turned 7, it was very interesting. I love making paper dolls. How many of you have had paper dolls in your life? Put your hand up. Come on, girls. Come on, boys. It's okay too. Paper dolls. Now, paper dolls was one of my creations, and I had a bevy of them. Little cardboard cutouts, girls flappers, and I used to costume them in shoes and clothes, and loved it. They were my pride and joy, so I'd bring them with me to Ipoh. And this time, it was the month before I went to primary school, so I was very proud. I was showing that to my great-grandmother. And I remember her sitting and watching me. And she said, "Awan, are you going to be taking these dolls to school?" Why not? Nobody stands between my dolls and I. I'm so proud of my creations, and I consider myself pretty creative. Some of the fashion numbers, you should have seen them at 6 years old. But she looked at me quietly, and she didn't say anything more, except that she gathered up some wood for the cooking, they still have the outdoor kitchen cooking, put on the fire. It's time for dinner. And then she progressed to come up to me, and I thought, great, she's looking at my dolls. Picked them all up. I marched with her to the kitchen, and she put it in the fire. How do you think I felt? Now, most of us would think, oh, what a horrible great-grandmother. It was my first great adversity. And as a young child, my only decision was, if you kill my dreams and that's the way you show love, well, I guess I need to learn something harder. And I decided that I was never going to feel as hurt as the day that she made me feel that way. I hated her that day. I really did. And I decided that in my whole life, I will be following rules. I will be loved and liked no matter what. Now, it served me for a long time. So I will leave this story for a little bit because it also stopped me in a lot of ways, because my creativity was shot. Okay. Now, a lesson in mythology. How many of you love reading myths about King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table?
Oh yeah.
I love stories. So I'm going to share with you a story of King Arthur who had just moved away from Camelot. And he'd taken with him his whole entourage, but he left his good old saber Excalibur in Camelot and moved to Carlisle. Now, in the process, as he was hunting in the forest, he came upon the Black Knight. And the Black Knight is evil. And because he didn't have Excalibur with him, his energy started to drain. And the Black Knight said to King Arthur, I can slay you right now without Excalibur. But that would be too easy. So I'm going to give you a year from now to find out the answer to one question that I and many, 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 many men have never been able to answer. And if you can come back with a suitable answer, I shall spare you your life. But if you don't, then I shall slay you and be the highest king of England. In his weakened state, he felt really bad, but he rode out of the forest. And what he did was, next slide please. The question was this: what do women most desire? And he had to find that answer in a year. And you think that must be easy, right? And I'm going to ask each of you as a woman to think of what you most desire. And I'm not sure whether you even know it. So if you do, maybe you pencil it down or whisper it to someone next to you and see whether you're right. Because that was the quest of King Arthur. This is time immemorial. Great question. So what happened was, as he came upon asking many, many people, what do women want? They had answers like beauty, a rich husband, wealth,
shoes,
fashion, right? But he didn't feel that was kind of deep enough. So as he was heading back into the forest a year later, he was not happy with the research that he'd done, but he thought, well, if I don't know the answer to that, so I might as well be killed, because that should be something as a king I should know. So in the forest, he comes upon the Loki lady, and she was this woman who looked as obnoxious as that. She had eyes that were red-rimmed and dripping with pus. And he could smell her before he even saw her. And her skin was riddled with rash and warts. And she was an ugly, ugly woman. So as he approached the Loki hag, she said, King Arthur, you have a question you have to answer. Isn't that right? And he said, absolutely. I've asked every woman in the land, including Guinevere, and nobody has given me a satisfactory answer. So he said, can you tell me the answer, oh lovely lady? And he said, since you're so kind to me, yes, I shall tell you the answer. And she leant over, and he could really smell her. It was terrible. And he listened, and she whispered the answer. And he said, is that what it is? Okay, I'm going to go to find the Black Knight. Off to find the Black Knight, and he told the Black Knight the answer. Said the Black Knight, I can't believe you got the answer! Oh my God! Now I have to release you! And off he went. Now, as he was coming I forgot a promise that he gave the Lothely Hag, that if the answer satisfied the Black Knight, she had to promise him to do one thing, and that is that he had to let her marry one of the Knights of the Round Table. So that was the bargain. Okay. So let's leave the story for now, because I'm sure you're curious about what women desire. But I'll leave you hanging, because nothing like a good story for a little while. So let's move on to the next slide. So as you think about what do women want around the world today, and what do women want throughout the ages, let me share a story of how I've actually looked through the research over the last 4,000 years of what women truly want. And what has come up is, amazingly, as I looked through the ages, and I actually scanned from 4,300 BC to about 2005, but I'm not going to bore you with a history lesson for the whole lot, because I've only been allotted about a quarter of an hour. So let us move on, and actually I'll take some snippets by looking at the highlights of each of our eras. In 2020 BC, can we move back first? Thank you. In 2020 BC, we were considered an ancient world at the height of the Bronze Age. And women, funnily enough, most of around the world, were typically only responsible for the survival of the tribe through bearing children. But in pockets around the world, like in Egypt, writings have been seen that in 2020 BC, it was the only community where women actually had lands, and when they married, they could keep their lands, and if they chose divorce, they could actually ask for legal counsel. That was pretty forward-thinking in 2020 BC. Are you surprised? So in pockets in the world right now, closing on to 2020 AD, we still have pockets of communities that are where the women have a bad lot, but we are also quite progressive in some of our contemporary world. So think about it, 4,000 BC, 4,000 years ago, we had similar thing. What happened? Now, despite the fact that there was so-called equality in one community, the rest weren't. So they're still an outlying community. But as we move forward, next slide, please. We also have outliers that were queens and warriors, and actually women that were priestesses as careers. So the career you could have as a woman in the ancient world were those. And there are many examples. I mean, Queen Cleopatra is a famous one. And there's the mother of King Alexander the Great, who actually upon his death was a warrior that fought to keep his legacy. So there are amazing outliers, for which the 22 women that you saw this morning are the outliers right now of our community. Let's keep moving on to the next slide, please. So let's move forward 2,500 years to 520 BC. It's still an ancient world, but right now, Athens is getting democracy. Okay? Was it democratic for men, for women? No. It was democracy for only men, but not for women. How did we go backwards? Interesting. So at that time, around the world, where we thought we were hitting the modern age with the concept of political equality, that wasn't happening. Next slide, please. But right in China, as the Han Dynasty was starting to come to a close, little Vietnam had freedom fighters like the Trung sisters, who were well known for the fact that they were fighting and they were leading armies. And they were not the only ones. So there are outliers even in Southeast Asia. So once again, our 22 women perhaps are the outliers that we're looking at. Then in 520 AD, another 1,000 years moved forward. And this is our early Middle Ages. And this is the time in the Arabic world that mathematics and physics were becoming big. And the number 0 came from India and Arab. So this is like things were thriving, but there weren't too many thinkers who were women. We were only looking at writers who were men. But again, there are outliers as well. And these outliers, funnily enough, started to actually trade off the fact that they could be courtesans and heteroids, so they are basically Greek women, there were French women, there were also Asian women, like the geishas, who were actually very intelligent, and some of the geishas that you hear about in Japan were musical, so they entertained men, not because they were anything, but they were skilled in music. They were skilled as speakers and thinkers because they were actually advising some men. So these were their careers, but they never married, and they cannot marry because they're going against the grain. Let's move forward to another 800 years into now the classical medieval Middle Ages. Now in 1320, most of us are probably thinking, what are women doing right now? We're probably at the most oppressed at this time, mostly. And in fact, most of the time, like I said, we were even burnt at the stake for witchcraft when we actually started to learn things about nature, like herbs and medicines. We were burnt at the stake for knowledge. Okay, so, but again, we have outliers as well. If you think about not only in France with Joan of Arc, when she listened to a voice, she led armies. When Fa Mulan in China had the call to not let her father, who was injured, to go to war, she became one of the greatest generals in Chinese history. So how do these women step up? So I ask you, we come from good grain. We do, we have got great genes. And moving forward, now into the Renaissance. It's now the enlightenment of the world. Where are we as women? Most of the time, again, none of the writers that we speak of, sorry, did we skip over the slides too quickly? Okay, so there were also women again in China and in Europe. In Europe, you can think about the French Revolution, and there were a lot of women fighting. In China, there were pirates around that time, but a woman like Qing Yi became a pirate lord, where she actually reformed piracy. And we don't hear a lot about these women, do we? In our history books, we have to troll through them. But they are the giants by which we're standing on. This is the stock we're talking about that has given us this need to do what we want to do, to be outliers. And moving right along, right to the time of the flappers, right? So 1920, as this theme is, we talk about the Great Gatsby, but the reason why I thought Li Yin picked this theme is for the first time, it is the thoroughly modern Millie. We are looking at women in our modern world. For the first time, we're not clothing ourselves where we have to, cover ourselves from top to bottom. We're actually now showing some knee. We're doing some really raunchy dances like the Charleston. And we are actually becoming part of a modern world, particularly after the First World War, when we had lost men in the war and women had to take on duties that men did. So for the first time, actually, we were starting to actually feel the freedoms that we needed to do. So, and as we kept going, what now, as we move forward, by people like Sylvia Pankhurst, the suffragettes, who've actually given us the right to vote, and moving on now, what is it that women really want? We've been the same through the ages, don't you think? Pretty much. So what's this unconscious bias that we talk about? Where does it come from? Let me finish this lesson in mythology, where Sir Gawain, one of the knights of the Round Table, actually leans in. This happens in the Middle Ages. Lean in actually happened before Sheryl Sandberg was written in mythology. So when King Arthur came back to the palace and said that he needed to have one of the knights married off to the local hag, most of the knights who were already married said, thank God, I don't have to marry this lady. But Sir Gawain leant in and he said, my liege, if you have been saved, I shall come forward and I shall marry this woman. And so he stepped up, and there was actually quite sadness, but Sir Gawain is one of the most chivalrous knights there are at the Round Table, and he was also the nephew of King Arthur. So as Sir Gawain went in, there was actually a funeral march when the Loathly Hag was married to Sir Gawain. Now in that wedding night, as Sir Gawain had to pretty much hold his nose with his bride in the bridal chamber, the Loathly Hag says, "My husband, look at me." As she came into the bridal chamber lighting a candle, he looked up, and there before him was a beautiful woman, the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. And he went, "What's this?" And he said, "Well, part of the deal was I was bewitched, and the only way I could actually at least get half the spell broken is if a knight as chivalrous as you would marry me, which you have. So you have the joy of seeing me half the day or half the night in this form, and the other half as the Loathly Hag. So my husband, which do you choose?" So men, which would you choose?
Tough call.
So Sir Gawain thinks, well, if I choose her to be as she is tonight, I get the joys of just not sharing her with anyone. How wonderful. And during the day, I can ignore her. But he's also a chivalrous knight, I can't say this word. And he thought, well, if she came to him looking as loathly as she does, but he can show her off during the day when she's so beautiful, wouldn't that be good? He thought about it and he says, "My dear wife, I cannot choose. Because either way, there is something." So he said, he said, my darling wife, choose yourself. And the spell was broken. She said, "Now I can be this form for the rest of our life together because you have given me my will." So, what is it that women want? They want their will. And I guess what it is that the 22 women who showed us this morning is what all women desire, is to have sovereignty over their own lives, to have their own way. No matter whether it is to choose to stay home and bear children or go and be a CEO, it is their will. And I guess one of the things that I learned looking back at my great-grandmother, she was my original coach. She didn't tell me what to do, did she? She showed me a hostile world that even someone who could love me would burn my creations. And I thought about it at 6 years old with my limited experience. I made a decision that I was going to follow processes and do my duty as a woman to follow the rules. But what if I had questioned my great-grandmother and I said, "Okay, burn my dolls, why not? Burn my dolls. And I will make another lot of dolls because I am the creator of the dolls, and it's Paper Dolls 2.0 that I'll make, and maybe Paper Dolls 3.0, and so on and so forth." So what I'm going to leave with you is this. What is your will as women? And how would you get your Sir Gawains to lean in for you? Because after all, it's not the adversity that happened, but it's your choice to make the decision on whether the world is bad, whether you follow your duty or you follow what you love doing. So go find that love in your life, which is within yourself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yvonne. Round of applause for her.